A nurse is about to remove a ring from a corpse. What she sees on the woman's body causes the whole family to burst into tears. The sun had barely risen when Kama opened the door of her house with the baby in her arms. The morning air was still cool with that smell of wet grass that always came in from the street outside. Barely 4 months old, he was waving his little arms in the air as if he wanted to grab everything. "Ready, my love? Let's go quickly to buy your things," Camilla murmured, pressing her nose against his little face and eliciting a soft giggle. In the living room, Daniel, her husband, was sitting in front of the computer, already in the middle of his work. He took off his glasses for a moment and looked at them. "Are you sure you don't want me to go with you?" he asked worriedly. "It's still early, love." Camilla laughed as she settled the baby into the stroller. "Don't worry, my love. I don't want to bother you with your work. I'm just going to the supermarket. I'll be back before you miss us." Daniel got up, kissed her on the forehead, and then on Emilio's little head. "Come back soon. I love you both." Camilla winked at him and left, pushing the stroller slowly along the sidewalk. With every step, she talked to Alio as if he could understand everything. "Today, Mommy is going to buy new diapers. Milk. Fruit. You like fruit, don't you? You can't eat it yet, but soon you will." The baby made soft noises, a mixture of ah and goo, which made Kama laugh to herself. She began to sing softly one of those old songs her mother used to sing to her. The rhythm accompanied her steps, and Alio moved his little legs as if he were dancing in the stroller. When they arrived at the market, there weren't many people there yet. The shopping carts bumped gently into each other. The employees were restocking the shelves, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the bakery. Camilla carefully placed Alio in the large supermarket cart, and he looked at her with wide eyes, almost mesmerized by the bright lights on the ceiling. "Look, son. So much brightness it looks like a sky full of stars," she said, adjusting his pacifier in his little mouth as she pushed the cart through the aisles, picking up diapers, powdered milk, and some fruit. At each stop, she bent down to play with Alio. "Mommy, do you want an apple or a pear?" "Say, if you want an apple," the baby replied with a little scream and waved his hands. Camilla laughed loudly, attracting the attention of a woman who was passing by. "What a beautiful baby," the woman commented tenderly. Kama thanked her with a smile, feeling her chest fill with pride. Everything seemed to be in its place. The world turned peacefully. Simple life tasted like hope. As she walked down the aisle, she hummed softly again, leaning over the cart. "Sleep, my child, sleep now." Alio sucked on his pacifier slowly, staring at her as if he found the safest place in the world. In that voice, Camilla walked around a few more times and stopped again in front of the fruit stand. Breathing deeply, she ran her hand slowly over the red apples and smelled an orange, as she always did before choosing. But suddenly she felt a strange twinge in her chest, as if something were squeezing inside, taking her breath away. She blinked several times, trying to see better, but everything began to blur. The bright colors of the fruit became blurred, like mixed stains. Her hand trembled. "Oh, how strange," she murmured almost without a voice, bringing her hand to her chest. She tried to lean on Emilio's cart, but her arms no longer responded. "Well," the baby, sensing his mother's discomfort, frowned and let out a soft cry, as if he understood that something was wrong. "Mommy's fine," she whispered weakly, trying to calm her son. But her body no longer obeyed her. Cold sweat ran down her forehead. She had trouble breathing, as if the air wasn't getting in properly. Alio was now crying louder, his little eyes filled with tears, his little arms moving in the air, asking for a hug that didn't come. Suddenly, Camilla's legs couldn't take it anymore. The blow was sharp, and her body fell to the cold floor of the market. The noise scared those who were passing by. The baby began to cry loudly, desperately, shaking in the stroller as if he could reach his mother on the floor. A woman who was nearby dropped her groceries and covered her mouth with her hands. She gasped and screamed, then collapsed with fear. Other customers ran to see what had happened. A man dropped a bag of rice. An employee from the bakery stood still, not knowing what to do. Alio's crying was heartbreaking, echoing throughout the aisle like a cry for help. Some approached and crouched down next to her. Others did not move, too frightened to do anything. Time seemed to stand still there between the baby's cries, the fading breaths, and the confused looks of those who didn't know if it was just a fainting spell or something much worse. The entire market aisle was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by Elio's loud cries. The sound was louder than any alarm, sharper than any siren. It was the pure cry of a baby calling for his mother. One of the employees, nervous, approached. He was young, his uniform wrinkled, and his hands trembling. He crouched down quickly and picked Elio up, trying to calm him. "Shh, baby, calm down. Your mummy will wake up soon," he said, but his voice came out broken and uncertain. But Elio wouldn't accept it. He moved in the stranger's arms, his eyes red from crying so much. His little hands were open in the air, searching for the familiar face of his mother lying on the floor. Every movement was a desperate cry. "Give her back to me." The employee tried to rock the baby gently, but the more he did so, the more Elio shrank, arching his body and screaming with a high-pitched cry that could be heard throughout the market. A white-haired lady with steady hands despite her age approached with tears in her eyes. "Give him to me, son. Give him to me," she asked in a soft voice. She took Elio in her arms and began to sing softly, an old song. But the baby would not calm down. He buried his face in the woman's chest and then turned his head toward the body lying on the floor. His little arms stretched out, begging for a touch that did not come. "He wants his mother. My God, he just wants his mother," the woman murmured, crying along with the baby. The people around them could no longer contain their emotions. A young woman put her hand to her mouth, trying not to cry. A man put his cell phone in his pocket, as if he had decided not to call anyone, paralyzed by what he was seeing. Another woman took her cell phone out of her bag. It was unlocked with no password. Luckily, the first name she saw was my love, and she called Daniel. There were already 2 or 3 other people calling the hospital at Camilla's feet. Some fruit had rolled onto the floor, a bruised apple, an orange lying next to her hand. Small details that made everything feel even more cruel. As if life had stopped in the middle of something normal. Elio's crying grew louder, desperate, and everyone felt a lump in their throat. That child was calling for a mother who did not respond. The supermarket aisle, full of shelves and cold lights, became a place of shared pain. No one knew Camila well. But when they heard the baby's cries, they all felt as if it were happening to them. The heart of every person there broke along with Elio's. Time flew by. 10 minutes passed very quickly. The sirens cut through the air, mixing with Elio's cries, which could still be heard in the market. The automatic door burst open, and almost at the same time as the paramedics, Daniel entered breathless, his face full of anguish, his eyes wide with fear. He had run so fast that he seemed to have no air in his lungs. As soon as he saw her lying on the floor, he shouted, "Kama!" His voice came out broken, like a stifled cry. He knelt beside her, not caring about anything else, not even the people hinging in silence. He took his wife's cold hand and pressed it against his chest, as if he wanted to give her back her warmth. "Kama, my love, wake up. Please don't leave me," he begged. Tears falling on her face, his fingers trembling, running through her hair and over her face, searching for any sign of life. He pressed his ear to her chest, desperate, as if he could hear a heart hidden inside. "No, it can't be. This morning you were fine. Talk to me, my love." His voice broke into sobs. Behind him, the woman holding Elio slowly approached. The baby, recognizing his father's voice, stretched out, trying to reach him. Daniel turned around for a moment and picked him up with one hand, pressing him against his chest, while continuing to hold Camila with the other. "We're here, my love, me and Elio. We need you. Come back to us, please," he shouted, looking at her motionless face. The paramedics made their way through with the stretcher. One of them said firmly, "Sir, we have to take her now. Please let us do our job." Daniel didn't want to let her go. He clung to her hand as if it were the last thing connecting them. 2 paramedics had to lift him up carefully. "Sir, we're going to do everything we can. Trust us," one of them repeated. He finally let go of Camilla's hand, but only for a second, because as soon as they put her on the stretcher, he ran to her side and grabbed her fingers again. Walking beside her, stumbling, crying, the stretcher rushed toward the ambulance. The wheels hit the market floor, the sharp sound mixing with Daniel's desperate cries. "Don't take her away, Camila. Hold on." The ambulance doors opened and her body was placed inside, with cables and devices hastily connected. Daniel climbed in too, hugging the baby who wouldn't stop crying. He kissed the child's head while tearfully saying to his unconscious wife, "I'm here. I'm coming with you. I'll never let you go." And the ambulance sped off, leaving behind the supermarket and the speechless stares, carrying inside it the love of an entire family, suspended between life and death. The clinic hallway was filled with hurried footsteps and tense voices. Inside the emergency room, Camilla's body lay on the stretcher, surrounded by doctors and nurses who never stopped moving. The air smelled of alcohol and latex mixed with the rapid beeping of the monitor. "Charge to 200, shouted one of the doctors. The defibrillator touched her chest. The shock made her body arch, but she immediately fell back heavily, motionless. The monitor flashed, showing an almost straight line again. Quickly another shock, then another, then another. Cardiac massage. The doctor's hands pressed hard on Camilla's chest at a steady rhythm, as if trying to wake a sleeping heart. "Come on, breathe. Breathe, please," murmured one of the nurses, her eyes already filled with tears. But nothing changed. The monitor continued to insistently beep, a cold, emotionless straight line. Daniel, with Elio in his arms, watched from the doorway, unable to breathe properly. "Come on, do something. Don't leave her," he shouted desperately. One of the doctors turned around with a sad face, looked at the clock on the wall, took a deep breath, and said in a low but firm voice, "Time of death, 11:47. Those words hit the room like a bullet. The silence that followed seemed to take the air away. Daniel let out a loud cry, almost like an animal, and fell to his knees. Alio was in the arms of his grandmother, who had come running. He felt the sadness in the air and began to cry harder, stretching his little arms toward his motionless mother. A nurse pulled the white sheet and raised it to Camilla's chest. That simple gesture was like a sentence. Daniel crawled to the stretcher, took his wife's cold hand, and brought it to his face. "No, it can't be. I'm here. You were fine yesterday. You were laughing with me. It can't be." He put his forehead against hers, letting the tears fall uncontrollably. "How am I going to raise our child alone? Tell me how." The baby and her grandmother's arms kept stretching. His little fingers opened and closed in the air, pointing toward her mother, who no longer responded. His crying filled the room with a pain impossible to calm, as if it were the echo of a sadness that no one could console. No one said anything. Doctors and nurses bowed their heads. Some swallowed hard, trying not to cry. The scene was not just the death of a patient. It was an entire family breaking apart in front of everyone. And there, in that heavy silence, only the innocent sound of a baby calling for his mother, who could no longer answer, could be heard. Alio was restless in his grandmother's arms. His small body moved, his little mouth opened, searching for something that was no longer there. He turned his head from side to side, desperate to find his mother's breast. His crying was no longer just because of hunger. It was because of loss, because of instinct, because his little heart was searching for the warmth that had always cared for him. "My sweetheart, calm down, murmured his grandmother, rocking his body back and forth, her voice trembling almost like a whisper. She tried to hold the baby close to her own chest, as if she wanted to distract him from his pain just by being close to him. But Elio moved away restlessly, crying even louder until he ran out of breath. His crying broke the silence, and with it came her tears, falling incessantly onto her grandson's soft hair. "Oh, Camilla," sobbed the grandmother, closing her eyes tightly. "What am I going to tell him? How can I explain that you're no longer here?" The baby clung to her blouse, his little fingers pulling hard, as if he believed he could bring his mother back just by doing that. Meanwhile, in the next room, the doctor finished filling out the paperwork. The silence was broken only by the sound of the pen against the paper. He did not hesitate, showing no uncertainty on his tired face. Cause of death, heart failure. He signed the document firmly, as if it were just one of many he had already filled out. He closed the folder, took a deep breath, and left the room without noticing the eternal weight those words carried. Alio continued to cry, lost, not understanding why his grandmother's hug wasn't the same. He searched for his mother's scent, her warmth, her milk, But he only found tears that wet his innocent skin. And in that painful contrast between a baby who still wanted to breastfeed and a cold piece of paper that marked the end, the world felt too unfair. The living room of Camila's parents' house was filled with a silence that was only broken by the sound of soft music playing in the background. It was a simple melody with guitar and vocals, the kind that speak of love and farewell. The candles placed around the room illuminated the space with a flickering yellow light that cast shadows on the sad faces. The smell of fresh flowers filled the air, mixed with the aroma of melted wax. In the center of the room, the open coffin revealed Karma's peaceful face. People approached slowly, as if they didn't want to believe it. They whispered in low voices. She looked as if she were only asleep. So beautiful. So peaceful. It was true. Her face looked peaceful, as if she were about to wake up at any moment. Her hair was combed, her skin was fair, her lips had a hint of pink. Nothing showed the suffering of her last moments. Daniel was sitting in a chair next to her with his hands clasped together, his eyes red and swollen. He said nothing, just stared at her as if waiting for a sign, a tiny movement. Anything that would tell him that none of this was real. "Love, come back to me. Just open your eyes once," he murmured silently, unaware that his lips were moving. Camila's mother, tired from crying so much, rested her head on her husband's shoulder. Sometimes she ran her hand over the coffin, caressing the wood as if she were touching her daughter. The siblings, a little further away, looked at each other with pain, trying to stay strong. Friends arrived slowly, some with flowers in their hands, others only with eyes full of tears. They hugged Daniel in silence because there were not enough words for that moment. Alio slept in his grandmother's arms, sobbing softly, tired from crying so much. His breathing was short and restless, as if his little body still felt the absence of his mother. Even though he was asleep, he sometimes moved and murmured quietly, and his grandmother kissed his sweaty forehead. The background music seemed to speak directly to everyone's heart. Each note filled the room with a gentle but deep pain. It was as if each lit candle were a desperate wish for the impossible to happen, for Karma to open her eyes and smile once more. No one wanted to leave. No one dared to look away. Because in that coffin was not only a young mother, there was a piece of the life of every person who loved her. And in the face of that tear-filled silence, there was only that cruel feeling that it really seemed as if she were only asleep. The wake continued in silence when Daniel, sitting next to the coffin, reached out his trembling hand and gently touched Karma's cold hand. His eyes filled with tears as he saw the discreet sparkle of the ring that was still firmly on her finger. He ran his thumb over the ring slowly, as if he wanted to keep that detail in his memory forever. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice came out trembling, almost like a whisper. This ring was everything to her. Close relatives approached, trying to listen. Daniel swallowed, looking at his wife's peaceful face. She always said, "Daniel, this ring is my heart. As long as I have it, I will never leave you." Camila's mother covered her mouth with her hand and cried softly. A longtime friend, standing further back, silently wiped his eyes. Daniel continued to caress the ring as if talking to her. "My love, you never took this ring off. Not even to sleep or to cook. I remember when I scratched the pot, and you laughed and said, 'It doesn't matter, it's the sound of love.'" He laughed a little, but then his voice broke with a sob. His chest rose and fell heavily as his hand held on to her finger. "And now she's here with me, and I don't know how to live without you." His voice broke, and he lowered his head, resting his forehead on her hand. The baby in his grandmother's arms moved restlessly, as if sensing the weight of that sadness in the air. He let out a little whimper with his little mouth, and Daniel looked up, his eyes full of tears, looking at his son for a moment, then looking back at Karma, squeezing the ring tighter. "You said this ring was the heart. If that's true, then now I'm holding your heart and I'm never letting go." His words hung in the air along with the scent of flowers, the soft light of the candles, and the gentle music that continued to play. No one dared to say anything because at that moment everyone understood that the ring was not just a piece of jewelry. It was the symbol of a promise that not even death could erase. Dawn had already swallowed the house. All those who were still there had gone to rest in some corner, overcome by the exhaustion of crying. Only Daniel remained seated next to the coffin, motionless, his eyes red, his body hunched over, his hands clutching Camilla's cold hand. The room was lit only by candles, and the wind coming in through the window made the flames move, casting shadows that danced on the walls. The soft music had already stopped, and all that remained was the distant sound of a clock ticking slowly, as if mocking him. Daniel leaned over his wife, his lips almost touching her cold skin, and whispered in the lowest voice that had ever come out of his mouth, "Can you still hear me, my love?" The silence in the room responded with even more silence. He closed his eyes tightly, tears falling uncontrollably, and continued talking as if he were speaking into the void. "I don't know what to do." His chest rose and fell. "How heavy. How am I going to raise our son on my own? He's so little. He needs you. I need you too." His fingers squeezed the ring on her finger as if looking for a sign. Anything to confirm that she was still there somehow. "Last night you laughed with me. You said you were tired, but happy. And now I'm here. Alone." His voice broke. It turned into a sob. He rested his head on the edge of the coffin, clutching his wife's hand, and cried like a child. His whole body trembled between sobs. He murmured broken phrases. "Don't go. Don't leave me. I don't know how to live without you." Time passed, and overcome by exhaustion, his crying mixed with sleep, his breathing became heavy and choppy, and he fell asleep right there, his hand still intertwined with hers, lying next to the coffin. The scene was too painful. A broken man who loved so much, but now only had the cold of dawn and the silence of death for company. Anyone watching from afar might think he was just resting beside his wife, but in reality he was a lost man, praying in his dreams for something that seemed impossible, to have his Camila Luz Maria back. Camilla's nurse and childhood friend was alone in the hospital room, with the dim light of a lamp illuminating the papers on the desk. The hallways now silent, no longer filled with the hustle and bustle of the day. Only the distant sound of a metal cart could be heard from time to time, but inside her nothing was silent. She held tightly to the clipboard with Camilla's file, her fingers trembling. She reread the reports 1, 2, 3 times, the tests, the procedures, every note from the doctors. Everything seemed to be correct. Heart failure, that was what was written. But her heart told her otherwise. No, it wasn't just that, she murmured to herself as she ran her hand over her tired eyes. She remembered Camilla's face, still young, still full of life. She remembered her breathing, so weak, but still there. For a moment, she remembered the warm hand she held before they covered her body. Something was wrong. Something didn't add up. She got up and walked around the room with short, nervous steps. It was too fast. Too fast, she repeated to herself. She felt the weight of responsibility crushing her chest. She had worked for years in the hospital. She had seen so many people leave, but with Camilla it was different. As if her time had not come, as if there was still a chance that no one saw. Loose. Maria sat back down, rested her face in her hands, and took a deep breath. Silent tears began to fall. "Forgive me, God, but I can't accept that she's gone," she whispered. She knew her colleagues would not understand. For them, it was just another case, another piece of paper, another death. But for her, it was as if her own soul was screaming that there was still something left to see. Her gaze fell again on the signature on the certificate. She ran her fingers over the doctor's firm handwriting, and a silent rage ran through her. "It can't be just that. It can't," she said in a low voice, almost like a trapped outburst. The nurse stood there alone. As time passed and the hour of the funeral approached, the clock ticked away, indifferent to everything. But inside her, a certainty grew, uncomfortable and insistent. There was something about this death that wasn't right. And Luz Maria knew it. She wouldn't be able to rest until she understood what her heart was trying to tell her. The bell tower of the small village church rang. The wake had already lasted for years, and now the moment everyone feared was coming, closing the coffin. The room was full of people, neighbors, relatives, friends, even strangers who had come to show their support. The atmosphere was one of deep respect, but also of disbelief. It was as if no one could truly accept that Karma would never return. Daniel stood hugging Elio to his chest. The baby slept restlessly, letting out little moans as if even in his dreams he felt his mother's absence. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off Camila, her serene face, her still hands, her ring still shining discreetly. Every time he looked at her, he seemed to sink a little deeper into his pain. When the men from the funeral home approached to begin closing the coffin, Daniel stepped forward, almost stumbling, and raised his voice in desperation. Wait a moment." The priest, who was already ready for the final prayer, looked at him in surprise. Everyone turned to look at him. Daniel was breathing heavily, clutching the baby even tighter in his arms as if he were his anchor, preventing him from collapsing completely. "I can't," he said with a trembling voice. "I can't let her go. Not like this. Not with my heart on her finger." He reached for Camila's wedding ring. Tears streamed down his cheeks, wetting the cheeks of the child sleeping on his chest. She always said that ring was her heart. And now I need to take it with me. I need it because otherwise I won't be able to bear it," he said, crying. Silence filled the room. No one dared to interrupt. Only the sound of stifled sobs filled the space. Daniel then looked at Luz Maria, the nurse who was standing discreetly in the background. "Please," he said almost without a voice, "help me take the ring off, please. I can't do it myself." He kissed the baby's forehead as if asking for forgiveness for what he was about to ask, and whispered, looking at Camila, "Forgive me, my love, but I need to have you with me somehow." Ella Maria walked slowly to the coffin. Her gaze was full of doubt and pain, but also compassion. She approached, took a deep breath, and with a trembling hand prepared to fulfill the widower's request. The entire room held its breath. The moment was so full of emotion that it seemed as if even time had stopped. With trembling hands, she took a deep breath and leaned on the edge of the coffin. For a moment, she closed her eyes as if silently asking for strength. Then, carefully, she stretched her fingers toward Cama's hand. The ring sparkled in the dim candlelight. Camila's skin was cold and motionless, but when she touched it, Luz Maria felt something that made her heart race, a slight tremor, almost imperceptible, as if a small muscle had responded to the contact. She froze, withdrew her hand abruptly, her gaze fixed on the young woman lying there. Her heart was beating so hard that she felt everyone around her could hear it. She swallowed hard and looked around, but no one seemed to have noticed anything. Daniel was still crying, caressing the baby. The priest bowed his head in prayer. The others remained silent. "It couldn't have been my imagination," she murmured, almost without a voice, trying to convince herself. She looked at Camila's hand again. She hesitated. Should she try again? What if her tired mind, full of pain and guilt, was playing tricks on her? She rubbed her eyes, took a deep breath, and forced her fingers to move again. Carefully, she took Cama's finger to try to slide the ring back on. She felt something. A stiffness that seemed different. A chill ran through her body, and cold sweat ran down her neck. "My God," she whispered, frightened, stepping back once more. She closed her eyes tightly. It couldn't be. Maybe it was just the weight of her conscience, her confused mind creating things that weren't real. Even so, her heart told her that something wasn't right. She looked at Daniel, who was now drying his tears with his shirt sleeve, murmuring words of love to his wife. She looked at the baby, who was sleeping restlessly, making little sounds as if calling for his mother, even in his dreams. Luz Maria took a deep breath and put her hand back on Camila's. The coldness of her skin was real, but that strange feeling wouldn't go away. Another shudder, a very small sign, and she stood there paralyzed, not knowing if she was witnessing a miracle or if she was simply losing her mind from so much pain. The room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that seems to take your breath away. The priest opened the book, raised his voice softly and slowly, and began the last prayer. The sound was soft, but full of farewell. Daniel, sitting with Elio in his arms, turned his face away. He no longer had the strength to look at his wife lying there. His eyes were dry from crying so much, but inside he felt an enormous pain, like a sea that would not stop. He rocked the baby slowly, as if holding on to his son was the only thing keeping him standing. Meanwhile, Luz Maria stood next to the coffin, her fingers trembling, her heart beating fast and erratically. She tried to remain steadfast, but something inside her would not let her look away. And then she saw it. A small clear tear slowly falling from the corner of Camilla's eye until it touched her pale skin. Luz Maria opened her eyes wide and felt a chill throughout her body. She almost lost her breath for a moment. She thought she was going crazy, that her tired mind was playing tricks on her. But no, the tear was there, shining in the candlelight. The shock was so strong that the nurse let go of the edge of the coffin and covered her mouth with her hand. The priest continued to pray, unaware of what was happening. The family had their heads bowed. No one but her had seen it. Her chest filled with despair, and her voice came out loud without thinking, crossing the room like lightning. "She's alive." The phrase broke the silence, and everyone raised their heads at the same time. The coffin moved. Camilla's body moved slightly, as if fighting against the silence. A scream was heard from all sides. Some people stepped back. Others approached without understanding. Panic spread throughout the room. Camilla's mother clutched her head, screamed loudly, and fainted into her husband's arms. Daniel quickly dropped the baby into the arms of an aunt and ran to the coffin, tripping over his own feet. Camilla screamed with a voice full of fear and hope. The priest dropped the cross he was holding. The cross fell to the floor with a sharp sound, as if time itself had broken, and in front of everyone, the impossible was happening. Death no longer seemed so certain. The heart of every person there beat without rhythm, because something greater than all of them was happening before their eyes. The chapel became chaotic with screams, people running, crying mixed with hope. The funeral home staff did not know what to do. The priest remained pale with the cross lying on the ground. Daniel trembled, clutching Kama's hand and repeating her name over and over, as if it were the only word that existed in the world. Then someone shouted, "The ambulance! Quick, to the hospital!" They hurriedly placed her body back on the stretcher. The candles, the flowers, everything was left behind. People desperately made way for them. The sound of the siren filled the air again, but now it had a different meaning. It wasn't the end. It was the fight. Daniel climbed into the ambulance as best he could, hugging his son. The tears wouldn't stop flowing, but along with them, there was a tiny glimmer of hope that he barely dared to feel. "Hang on, my love. Hang on for us," he said between sobs, holding his hand. Although the paramedics asked for space, the ambulance sped off, followed by a line of cars. It was as if the whole city wanted to go with them, not wanting to miss a second of this miracle. The headlights lit the way. The engines roared loudly, and each honk was a cry of faith. At the clinic, everything started moving quickly again. Doctors and nurses prepared, turning on machines, connecting tubes and cables. As soon as Camilla entered, they hooked her up to the machines. The sound of the ventilator filled the room. The monitor now showed a fragile but living line. Daniel stood in front of the glass with Elio in his arms, looking at his wife lying surrounded by doctors. His heart beat at the same rhythm as that irregular beep. Every time the line went up and down, he cried with relief. "Thank you, God. Thank you," he murmured, pressing the baby against his chest. The doctors worked in silence, very focused, adjusting the machines and checking her signs. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, one of them came out, looked at the family in the hallway and said, "She's breathing but unconscious. We have to wait." The news spread through the hallways like wildfire. Hugs, tears, quiet prayers. People who didn't even know Camilla well cried with emotion. Inside, she remained still, connected to the machines. Her body still weak but alive, a miracle sustained by medicine, faith and love that never stopped calling her. Outside, it seemed as if the whole city was holding its breath with her, waiting for the next sign, the next movement, the next miracle. The hospital room was filled with a heavy silence. The only sound was that of the machines helping Kama breathe, and that was the only thing that gave Daniel hope. He was sitting next to her with Emilio asleep in his arms. His gaze was lost, his beard grown out at his body, tired from so many sleepless nights. When his mother-in-law arrived to take the baby and let him rest for a while, Daniel finally got up. His mind was confused, but there was one thought that wouldn't go away. Why? Why had everything happened so suddenly? Why had such a young and healthy woman suddenly been declared dead? He walked over to Camilla's bag in the corner of the room and opened it slowly, as if it were something forbidden. He began to search through her things, handkerchiefs, purse, photos, some old notes until his fingers touched something forgotten at the bottom. A thin folder worn out by time with yellowed papers. His heart began to beat fast. He sat down on the couch and began to look through the papers. They were old studies with dates from 15 years ago. X-rays, reports, signatures of doctors he didn't know until, in the middle of the pages, a phrase in bold almost jumped out at him. Signs of clinical catalepsy. Daniel read it aloud without really understanding. At first, clinical catalepsy, he murmured, his voice trembling. He continued reading. Medical explanations, difficult words almost imperceptible. Breathing. Very weak heartbeat. The folder fell from his hands and hit the floor with a thud. The papers scattered everywhere. Daniel put his hands to his head, his face contorted with pain. "My God," he whispered, unable to breathe properly. She already knew everything. His whole body began to shake. He knelt on the floor, picking up the papers with tears falling on the old sheets. "Why didn't you ever tell me this, Camila?" "Why?" he shouted in despair, looking at his wife lying unconscious in bed. His chest burned and guilt crushed him like a stone. If only he had known. If only he had paid attention to the signs. If only he had talked to the doctors, maybe everything would have been different. Kneeling on the cold floor with the crumpled test results in his hands, Daniel cried as if his world had fallen apart again. It was no longer just the pain of losing her. Now it was also the unbearable weight of knowing that for years a secret had been hidden, a secret that could have changed everything. Daniel sat in the hospital room with the lights off and only the dim light from the hallway coming in through the half-open door. On the small table next to the bed were photos he had brought from home. Photos of happy moments that now squeezed his heart. He grabbed one of them with trembling hands. It was from the wedding. Camila in a white dress, smiling with such joy, her eyes full of life. He was wearing a simple suit, holding her hand with such pride. Daniel ran his fingers over the image as if he could touch that moment again. "I should have known," he murmured with a broken voice. "I should have fought harder for you, my love." Tears fell on the photo. He closed his eyes tightly, but in his mind the scene repeated itself. The coffin, the straight line on the monitor, the coldness in the doctors' voices announcing the time of death. Everything came back like a knife. He grabbed another photo, this time of Elio's birth. Camila was tired, but smiling with the baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Daniel remembered how he cried with joy that day, promising him he would always be with them now. Seeing that image, he felt like a failure. "I promised to take care of you," he said, pressing the photo to his chest. "And look at what I did. I let you go. I let them say there was nothing more to be done, and I accepted it." The pain inside him grew like fire. He got up and began to walk aimlessly around the room, running his hands over his face and through his hair, as if he wanted to tear the guilt out with his fingers. How could I not have noticed how he was screaming inside silently so as not to wake Emilio, who was sleeping in his grandmother's arms in a corner of the waiting room? He sat back down in the chair next to the bed, took Camila's hand in his, squeezing it as if he could still save her from what had already happened. "You trusted me. You always trusted me, and I failed," he said between sobs. "Forgive me, my love, forgive me." Daniel looked again at the photos that were scattered around each one. It was a beautiful memory, but now it hurt like an open wound. Camila's smile was a cruel reminder of everything he believed he had lost by not fighting hard enough. The guilt made it hard to breathe, and he knew he would never be the same again, because inside his head a voice kept repeating, "I should have known. I should have fought harder." Luz Maria entered the doctor's room, with her heart about to explode. Her robe was still wrinkled from the wake, her eyes red from so many hours without sleep, but her voice came out like thunder. "Enough is enough," she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "How could you declare her dead?" Without even doing a neurological test. The doctors who were gathered looked up, some surprised, others annoyed. One of them tried to remain calm. "Nurse, we did everything in our power, but she didn't let him finish." "No, you didn't do everything," she replied, pointing her finger at him. "You saw the monitor, you saw a straight line, and you signed the paper. If I hadn't touched her, if I hadn't seen the tear, you would have buried a living woman." The room filled with murmurs. Some nurses lowered their heads in shame. The oldest doctor, tired of so many arguments, tried to close the subject. "Luz Maria, we understand your emotional state, but you must maintain discipline." "Discipline?" She laughed bitterly, tears in her eyes. "You know, they want me to stay quiet while they make such a mistake. They want me to bow my head while an entire family is almost destroyed by their haste." With each word, her voice grew stronger. She was already shouting, full of pain and indignation. If she had a child, not a husband. Do you have any idea what they were going to do to them? Bury a mother, a living wife. There was a heavy silence. The hospital director, who had been called in an emergency, entered the room and looked at her with a serious face. "Nurse Lutz Maria, understand. Your behavior is out of control. You are suspended for indiscipline until further notice." The sentence fell like a verdict, but Luz Maria did not back down. Tears ran down her face, but her gaze remained firm. "Suspend me if you want. Get me out of here if you want, but I'll tell you one thing. You are going to have to live with the conscience of this mistake." "I don't know." She turned around and left the room with steady steps. Even though her legs were shaking in the hallway, she leaned against the wall and cried silently, hiding her face in her hands. She wasn't crying for herself. She was crying for Camila, for Daniel, for the baby, and for the system that with its haste and coldness had almost taken a life. Anger burned inside her. She knew she had lost her job, at least for now. But in her heart she was sure she had done the only right thing, telling the truth out loud, even though no one wanted to hear it. The room was in darkness. The constant sound of the machines was the only sign that there was still life there. Camila moved her fingers slowly, as if trying to wake up from a deep sleep. She opened her eyes little by little, blinking against the dim light. Everything looked blurry and distant. She was breathing with difficulty, and her body felt trapped without strength. "Where am I?" she murmured almost without a voice. The door opened slowly, and Daniel entered. His tired, swollen eyes from crying so much changed the moment he saw her awake. He dropped what he was holding and ran to the bed. Camila said in a broken voice, taking his hand in hers. She tried to smile, but her face was filled with tears. Her eyes searched for him desperately, full of pain. "I heard everything," she said, swallowing hard. "I was trapped in my body. I could hear them all, but I couldn't come back." Daniel fell to his knees beside the bed, hiding his face in his hands, crying loudly without shame. "I'm sorry, my love. I'm sorry for not realizing, for not fighting harder." Camila stroked his hair, "Even though I was weak." "It wasn't your fault," she whispered, sobbing. "I just couldn't." They stayed like that for several minutes, just crying and breathing heavily until Camila squeezed his hand with effort. "Where is Alio?" "I want to see my baby." Daniel wiped his face with his shirt sleeve and called his mother-in-law, who came in with the little one in her arms. Alio was half awake, whimpering softly. With a heavy heart, the grandmother carefully placed her grandson in his mother's arms. Camila received him with a trembling smile, her eyes full of hope. She brought her face close and kissed his little head, murmuring, "My son, my life, Mommy is here." But Alio, feeling the unfamiliar embrace after so many days, began to cry. First softly, then louder and louder. His little body arched, pushing his face away from his mother. "No, no, my love. It's me," Camila pleaded, trying to calm him down. "I'm your mom. Look at me." The baby cried louder, stretching his little arms toward his grandmother, rejecting his mother's embrace. Camilla's smile vanished suddenly. She stood still with her son screaming in her arms. She felt her heart break. "He doesn't recognize me," she said, her voice breaking. "He forgot me." Tears fell on the baby's hay heads, mixing with his cries. Daniel tried desperately to hug them both. "Don't say that. Don't say that, please." But Camila was already breaking down, her whole body shaking. What should have been a loving reunion turned into even greater pain. The feeling that even her own son had turned away from her. The nights in the hospital became long and heavy for Camila, her body still weak, barely responding. But her mind did not rest. As soon as she closed her eyes, she returned to that dark moment, the silence, the darkness, the feeling of suffocation in her dreams. She saw herself inside the coffin, the cramped space, the cold wood against her skin. She tried to move her hands, but they wouldn't move. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was like being alive inside death. She heard distant voices, Daniel's crying, Elio's cries, and she couldn't reach them in her dream. Her heartbeat quickened until it felt like loud thumps in her chest. She scratched at the wood with her fingernails in desperation, but no one heard her. The feeling of abandonment and loneliness was unbearable. Suddenly, she heard the muffled sound of hammer blows as if they were nailing the lid of the coffin shut, and she screamed inside, begging for someone to notice her. "I'm here, don't leave me." At that moment, she woke up screaming, her body drenched in cold sweat, her eyes wide open, her breath cut off, as if she had really been fighting for air. Daniel ran to the bed and took her hand desperately. "Love, it's me. It's me. You're safe." It's, she cried, hugging him, trembling, unable to calm down. "I was there again, trapped, alone, and no one could hear me." She sobbed, hiding her face in his chest. Daniel held her tight, rocking her gently as if she were a child. "It's over, my love. It's over. You're back with us. I'll never let that happen to you again." But no matter how many times he repeated it, the fear wouldn't go away. Deep down, Camila felt that the experience had left her with very deep wounds. Every night, the same nightmares returned. Every night, the echo of her own voice calling for help still rang out, and the early morning, which had once been a time of rest, had now become the most painful time of all. Because in the silence of the darkness, she relived her own death over and over again, like a wound that never healed. Camila could now walk a few steps around her parents' house, her body still fragile, her mind still heavy. But there was something worse than physical weakness, the feeling that someone was watching her. The news had spread quickly in a small town. Nothing stays a secret. At first, everyone said it was a miracle, but soon the strange looks began gossip on street corners. When Camila went out arm in arm with Daniel, it was impossible not to notice. People would suddenly stop talking and stare at her as if they saw something they didn't understand. A mixture of fear and curiosity. "It's her," they whispered, "the one who came back from the coffin." Some turned their faces away and crossed themselves as if they needed protection. Others looked at her directly, as if they wanted to make sure she wasn't real. Camila felt each gaze like a stab in the heart. She lowered her head and walked faster. Once at the market, a woman pulled her son by the arm and whispered, but too loudly, "Don't go near her, son. That woman came back from the other world." Camila froze, her face burning with shame. She dropped what she was buying and ran away with her heart in her throat. At home, she cried, hidden in her room, not daring to tell Daniel what she had heard in the church, where she had always felt welcome before. It was different now. Some women looked at her with pity. Others whispered that God must have had his reasons for letting her return. But none treated her as they had before. One night, like she told Daniel, her voice breaking, "I feel like a monster. They look at me as if I shouldn't be here, as if I had stolen a life that was no longer mine." Daniel tried to hold back his tears, but her pain broke his heart too. "Love, don't listen to them. You're alive because that's how it had to be, because you still have a purpose." But words couldn't erase the weight of their stares. Camila looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. It wasn't just because she was pale or had deep circles under her eyes. It was the shame, the weight of carrying the label that the whole town had given her. The woman who should be dead. And in the silence of the night, that shame turned to guilt, as if being alive was somehow a mistake in the eyes of everyone. Camila sat on the edge of the bed with her shoulders slumped and her eyes fixed on the floor. The house was silent, but inside her the noise was very loud. Memories, glances, whispers, everything was mixed together. She felt that there was no air left in that city. "I can't take it anymore," she said in a low voice, her voice breaking. "Everything hurts here, Daniel. Every corner, every person. Even the silence hurts, Daniel." He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and a tired look on his face. He looked at her silently, as if searching for the right words so as not to break her even more. After a few seconds, he approached her and knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands. "I know, my love. I know this is unbearable, but is leaving really what you want?" Camila looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't live here. They look at me as if I were a ghost, as if I had stolen something that wasn't mine. I just want to live again. But here, Daniel, here I just die again, every day." He pressed her hands against his chest, feeling his heart race. He swallowed, trying to contain his emotion. But the tears came. "And if we start over somewhere else, just the three of us, you, me, and Alio, far from those stairs?" Camilla shook her head, crying. "What if it's the same there? What if I never get over it?" Daniel lifted her face gently, forcing her to look at him. "Then we'll face it together. Because I'm not going to leave you, Camilla. If you go, I'm going with you." She threw herself into his arms, crying uncontrollably. "I'm afraid," she confessed, "afraid of never being the same again. Afraid of not being a good mother to Alio. Afraid that you'll get tired of me." He hugged her tighter, closing his eyes. "Listen, I married you for everything, for laughter and for pain. And if you fell and got back up, it's because you still have a life to live." "I will never leave you alone," Camilla cried on his chest, and for a moment she seemed to breathe more calmly. There was determination in the air and also fear. But in that simple promise there was happiness with tears and truth. There was also the only thing that could sustain her, the certainty that wherever she went, she would not go alone. The move was simple but full of emotion. A truck with a few pieces of furniture, some boxes, and many memories left behind. Camilla sat in the front seat, looking out the window as the city where everything had happened grew smaller and smaller in the rear-view mirror. She squeezed Daniel's hand and Alio slept peacefully in her lap. With every kilometer traveled, it was as if the weight on her shoulders became a little lighter. In the new city, the air felt different. No one knew them. The neighbors greeted them with normal smiles, without whispers, without fear, without judgment. Camilla took a deep breath as if she could finally fill her lungs without feeling pain. Soon therapy began. In the office, she talked about the nights trapped in nightmares, the shame, the fear of not being accepted. The psychologist listened to her in silence, guiding her with simple but profound questions. "You didn't come back to carry a burden, Camilla. You came back to live what you hadn't yet lived," she said in one of the sessions. Those words remained engraved in her heart. Meanwhile, at home, Daniel strove to bring normality to everyday life. He made silly jokes, he cooked badly, but with love, and every detail helped Camilla believe that there was a future. The most difficult thing, however, was Alio. The baby still felt strange in his mother's arms. He cried and sought refuge in his dad or grandmother. Each rejection was like a stab in her heart. "He doesn't feel that I'm his mom," she said with tears in her eyes. But she didn't give up. She sang to him and rocked him. Even when he cried, she whispered softly in his ear, "I'm your mom. I'm here. I'll never leave you again." The days passed and something began to change. Alio no longer cried so much in her arms. Little by little, he accepted lying on her chest. He calmed down more when he heard her voice. Camilla cried with relief, with each small advance, as if her son were opening the doors of his heart again, until one sunny morning, while she was changing him. Alio looked her in the eyes, smiled, showing his gums, and said, "Mama?" For the first time, Camilla stood still, unable to believe it, her eyes filled with tears. "You said it. You called me," she said, hugging the baby to her chest, crying with emotion. Daniel, who was in the kitchen, ran when he heard the crying and found the two of them hugging. Camilla looked at him with a face full of love. He recognized me. Daniel, our son, recognized me. The three of them stayed together in that embrace, and for the first time in a long time, Camilla felt that she truly had a new opportunity, not only to live, but to be a mother and wife and start her story from scratch. The house was quiet that birthday morning. Camilla woke up to the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen and the soft sound of Daniel trying to sing Las Mananas to her while he prepared something simple. She smiled to herself still in bed. Surprised to feel light after so long, shortly after, Daniel entered the room with a makeshift tray, a cup of coffee, a piece of cake bought at the bakery, and a small candle stuck in the center. Behind him, Emilio was crawling, laughing as if he understood how important this day was. "Happy birthday, my love," said Daniel, placing the tray on the bed. His gaze was full of tenderness, but it also had a different sparkle, as if he were hiding a secret. They ate a piece of cake and laughed as they watched Elio try to grab the lit candle. And for a moment, the house seemed to be filled with normality, but Daniel didn't take his hand out of his pocket. He looked at her and took a deep breath as if he were preparing for something important. Then he finally took out a small box, opened it slowly, and revealed a delicate silver necklace with a heart-shaped charm inside it. Camilla's wedding ring sparkled inside. The world stopped for her in that instant. The air left her lungs. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw that ring, which had been part of her history, her life, her love. Daniel whispered, putting his hand to his mouth. He approached her, took the necklace, and placed it around her neck carefully, as if it were something sacred. Then he held the pendant between her fingers and said emotionally, "It came back to you, Camilla, where it always belonged." Her tears fell silently. She touched the necklace, then her husband's face. Unable to speak for a few seconds. Finally, her voice breaking, she replied, "Thank you for not giving up on me, for giving me back my heart." Daniel hugged her tightly, and Elio, not understanding, applauded and laughed as if he were also part of that moment. That birthday, there were no expensive gifts or parties. But there was something greater, proof that the love that united them had overcome pain, death and shame, and still shone brighter than ever. Camilla was tidying up the desk drawer, looking for some papers, when she found a yellowed envelope folded carefully. She immediately recognized Daniel's handwriting on the front. For when there is no other choice, her heart began to beat fast. She sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and with trembling hands opened the paper. The first words already brought tears to her eyes. "Camilla, I know you'll never read this, but I'm writing it because maybe I couldn't bear to live without you. I tried to be strong, but I don't know how to look at the world without your smile. I don't know how to breathe if you're not by my side. If I didn't make it, please, whoever finds this letter, tell Emilio when he grows up that my love for you both was bigger than life itself. Never doubt that you were and always will be the heart of my story." The letters were blurred in some places, as if he had cried while writing. Camilla put her hand to her mouth, sobbing loudly, feeling each word pierce her like a knife, and at the same time like a hug. "My God," Daniel murmured, pressing the paper against his chest. "How much you suffered." At that moment, Daniel entered the room with Emilio in his arms. He stood at the door when he saw the tears running down her face and the crumpled paper between her fingers. His heart sank. "You found the letter," he said in a low voice, almost ashamed. Camilla looked up, her eyes full of tears. "How could you write that? How could you think of leaving everything behind, staying alone?" He approached slowly, put the baby in the crib, and sat down next to her. He tenderly ran his hand over her wet face. "I wrote it because at that moment, I thought I was going to lose you. I didn't know if I would have the strength to go on. It was my way of leaving you and our son a last part of me." Camilla shook her head, crying harder. "I don't want to imagine you without strength anymore. Here I am. I'm back. We're together." He hugged her tightly, as if he wanted to press her to his chest. "I don't need that letter anymore. I have you," Camilla, still crying. He took her face in his hands and kissed her tears. "Never write anything like that again. Promise me." "I promise," Daniel replied with a trembling voice. "And if I ever write again, it will be to tell you how grateful I am that you are still here with me." They hugged for several minutes, rocked by the soft sound of Elio sleeping in his crib. The letter, now wet with her tears, remained nearby as a witness to a love that was about to be lost, but now found the strength to live on. The auditorium was full. Doctors, students, and nurses from various cities had gathered to hear stories about medical errors and what can be learned from them on stage. A screen displayed the title of the talk, "When Haste Costs Lives." Camilla sat in the front row, her heart racing. She held Daniel's hand tightly, who was next to her, and felt his sweaty fingers as she looked back. She saw rows of people looking at her expectantly. She took a deep breath. Luz Maria, who now worked at another institution, took the stage to introduce her. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone with emotion. "Today you are going to hear something you will never forget. It is not a common clinical case. It is the life of someone who was given up for dead, but who came back. She said Camilla's name, and for a moment her heart wanted to leap out of her chest. Daniel helped her up, and the applause began. With slow steps and short but determined breaths, she made her way to the microphone. For a few seconds, she couldn't speak. Her hands were shaking and her chest hurt. Then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let it out. "My name is Camila Reyes, and I am here because they didn't bury me alive." A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone stopped breathing, as if they already felt the weight of what was coming. I was 30 years old, healthy, the mother of a 4-month-old baby. Suddenly, my heart stopped, and the doctor said I was dead. Her voice faltered a little, but she continued, "But I wasn't dead. I could hear everything, feel everything. Only I couldn't go back." Tears began to fall. She didn't try to hide them. I heard my husband cry. I heard my baby cry for me, and yet they covered me with a white sheet. They signed a paper saying that my life was over. In the audience, some people bowed their heads. Others silently wiped their eyes, only because a nurse looked at Luz Maria, who was excited in a corner. She had the courage to doubt. "The fact is that today I'm alive." Camila took a deep breath, trying to control her trembling voice. "I'm not here to blame. I'm here to warn. A diagnosis made in haste can destroy an entire family, can take away a child's childhood, can erase a life that was still beating." The audience didn't move. Every word went straight to the hearts of those who were listening. I don't want any other mother to go through what I went through. I don't want any husband have to sleep next to his wife's coffin, believing she is gone. I don't want any child to grow up without being able to hear their mother's voice. She paused, wiped the tears from her eyes with her hand, and looked the people in the eye. "I am here because I had a second chance. But how many didn't have it? How many will not have it?" When she finished, there was silence for a few seconds, and then came the applause, first timid, then loud, until the entire auditorium was on its feet, clapping with tears in their eyes. Daniel went up on stage and hugged her, while Emilio, in his grandmother's arms, also clapped as if he understood what was happening. Camila cried, but this time it wasn't out of pain. It was because she knew that her voice, so fragile and trembling, could save lives she would never know. Camila walked slowly through the narrow streets of the city where everything had happened. Her heart was beating fast. Every corner brought back painful memories. Daniel held her hand. Alio ran ahead, laughing, not understanding how difficult it was to return. She took a deep breath. It wasn't easy to be there again, but she knew she needed to close that chapter. The hospital was still in the same place. She stood in front of the door for a few seconds. Her body hesitated, but her soul wanted to move forward. She entered. The doctor looked up from the paper he was filling out and froze. The pen fell from his hand. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Camila whispered in a broken voice. She got up slowly, not daring to approach him. His face showed shame, regret, and fear. "I don't know what to say." He put his hands on his head as if he didn't know what to do. "I was wrong. I almost buried you alive." Tears began to run down his face. His entire demeanor as a doctor completely fell apart. Now he was just a broken man in front of someone he almost lost because of his signature. "Forgive me," he said between sobs. "I swear I thought I was doing the right thing, but I failed. I failed you, your husband, your son." Camila felt a lump in her throat. She was silent for a moment, looking at this man who somehow carried a burden as heavy as hers. She took a step forward, then another, until she was standing in front of him. He lowered his head, unable to look her in the eyes. Then Camila, her eyes filled with tears, opened her arms and hugged him. The doctor stood motionless for a few seconds, surprised until he collapsed, crying on her shoulders. "You're human too," he said in a low, broken voice. "Humans make mistakes, but they also have the opportunity to get back up." His crying turned into sobs. Those words broke the prison of guilt that was suffocating him. He hugged her tightly, as if that embrace were the only possible form of forgiveness. Camila was also crying, but there was peace in her tears. Forgiveness did not take away the pain, but it did take away the weight. When he let go of the doctor, he took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and smiled a little. At that moment, something changed. The mistake still existed. The memory still hurt, but forgiveness had turned guilt into learning, and that was what the two of them would carry with them forever. The garden of the new house was full of life. The newly planted flowers swayed in the gentle afternoon breeze, and Elio's laughter filled the air like a pure melody. The boy ran across the grass, tripping over his own legs, but he got up quickly with the infinite energy of childhood. Camilla was sitting in a wooden chair with her eyes glued to her son, her heart beat faster with each step he took, as if each movement were a gift. She put her hand on her chest, feeling the strong, real heartbeat, like a vivid reminder that it was still there. Daniel appeared at the door and leaned against the frame, watching in silence. He saw his wife's eyes filled with tears and understood that this moment meant more than any words could say. Camilla whispered almost to herself, but loud enough for him to hear, "I died," and came back for him. The sun was slowly setting, casting golden rays on his face. The light illuminated every feature, every tear that slowly rolled down her cheek. For a moment it seemed as if time had stopped just to preserve that scene. She kept looking at Elio, who was now laughing loudly, trying to catch a butterfly. The sound of his laughter was like a cure, each laugh erasing a little of the darkness that still lived inside her. Daniel approached, knelt beside the chair, and took her hand. "You came back for both of us," he said, moved, "and I will spend my whole life being grateful for that." Camilla squeezed his fingers, but did not take her eyes off her son. Her chest was filled with such great love that it seemed it could not fit inside her. "He admire reason," Camilla said with a broken voice. "If I closed my eyes, it was he who called me back." The wind blew stronger, bringing with it the smell of freshly cut grass and the distant sounds of the neighborhood. But nothing seemed to matter more than that scene. A mother, a father, and a son in the yard of a simple house, turning the impossible into life. Camilla closed her eyes for a second, feeling the sun warm her skin, and smiled for the first time without fear, without shame, without weight, only gratitude. There in the silence between laughs, she understood. What would you do if it were your loved one lying there? Share your thoughts in the comments. If it made you cry or think differently about how you see those you love, then subscribe to the channel. Now, turn on the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories, because there are still many to come that will move you deeply. And before you leave, don't forget to click on the video that is appearing here on the